Hey there, it's Lars. Thanks for checking out the Lars Larson podcasting experience, and have a fantastic day.
The most pernicious thing about the Texas law, it sort of creates a vigilante system where people get rewards to go out to, anyway. And it just seems, I know this sounds ridiculous, almost un-American, what we're talking about.
That is Joe Biden, absolutely. And I want to give you a little heads up and a warning. Jen Psaki, the president's spokeswoman, is now speaking. The Secretary of State not long ago admitted we do actually have hostages on the ground in Afghanistan that are being held against their will by the Taliban because they don't have the paperwork to take off in an airplane. But we'll dip into her press conference if it's appropriate. But yeah, that's Joe Biden, the pro-abortion Catholic. See if you can figure that one out. But as I said, double standards for liberals, or they'd have no standards at all. Talking about what I think is a very sensible law in Texas that went into effect last Wednesday after the Supreme Court upheld it and said it could. 2 days later, Portland, here in the Pacific Northwest, declared a trade war on the Lone Star State. And there's a great story behind that. It seems that Ted Wheeler's going to get hoisted by his own petard, if you want to use a Shakespearean phrase for it. Welcome to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome to the Radio Northwest Network. It's honestly provocative talk for the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho for the last 21 years, and we hope to continue for another 21 after that. But welcome to the show. If you want to jump into what I call the best conversation in talk journalism, you're always welcome at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. And if you want to vote in our Twitter poll, you can do that as well. You'll find it at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and larslarson.com on the web. But I want to tell you about this crazy trade war because something has happened. You know, when Shakespeare said hoist by his own petard, a petard was a hand grenade, in effect, back in the day, that if you wanted to get into a castle, you threw this petard at the gate, it blew up the gate, and then you went in and took over whoever's castle you were attacking at the time. Well, when you're hoist by your own petard, it means that you got blown up by your own hand grenade. And I think that has just happened to Ted Wheeler, mayor of Portland. A vote to fire the shots in that trade war with Texas was scheduled to happen today. But now it appears that Mayor Feckless Ted's trade war has been put on hold, get this, for fear that Portland City Hall may end up literally buried in garbage with failing computers inside the building. Now, if you're wondering, Lars, how could garbage and computers have anything to do with a trade war with Texas? Well, let me get to that. Feckless Ted Wheeler's trade war has been put on hold because City Hall could end up buried in garbage with computers that do not work. The story actually begins with a passage of what I think is a very sensible ban on aborting unborn babies when a doctor can actually hear their heartbeat. Now, that actually happened in Texas 2 years ago. It was immediately challenged in court. All the other state laws that were similar, about a dozen of them, were struck down, but not Texas. Texas got the okay. So last Friday, Mayor Ted Wheeler declared that he would push a vote originally set for today, but I'll explain in a moment why that's been put on hold. Quoting Wheeler, "We urge other leaders and elected bodies around the nation to join us in condemning the actions of the Texas state government on an emergency resolution," and here's the way it read, to ban the future procurement of goods and services from Texas. Now, I immediately thought, what the heck does a city government in the Pacific Northwest like the city of Portland buy from companies in Texas? It turns out millions of dollars worth of things, and two key things in particular, computers and garbage service. Waste Management is a $55 billion a year company headquartered in Houston, Texas. It supplies most of the garbage and recycling service anywhere you want to go in the Pacific Northwest. If City Hall Portland ain't doing business with Texas companies anymore, then does the garbage just pile up outside Tear Gas Teddy's office? Portland's second big item of purchase from a Texas company is computers. Now, in full disclosure, all the computers in my studio, I buy them from Dell. A lot of companies buy them from Dell. It's very popular for businesses because Dell's a good, solid company. I don't do advertising for them, but I think a lot of their computers. Portland spends about $7.5 million a year on Dell computers and services. But the city of Portland is going to try and lie about that Texas business. And let me explain how that happens. We inquired, my friend Jim Ferretti, the news director at our flagship station, KXL, inquired of City Hall Portland saying, well, what are you going to do about Dell? And what they came back with is the beginnings of Ted's lie. The city of Portland purchases computers from Dell Marketing LP, which has a Chicago, Illinois address, according to the W-9 on file with the city. This company is a subsidiary of Dell Technologies. We do not have specific details about how the proposed ban will be administered, nor do we know how a new policy will define what it means to be a Texas-based business. Well, I don't find any doubt at all that Dell Computer is based in Texas and Waste Management is based in Texas. So Feckless Ted has some choices to make. He can call off his trade war with Texas so City Hall can get the computers it need and get its garbage hauled as well. Or try a fancy workaround like, we're not buying from a Texas company, we buy from Dell office in Chicago. Now, let me make a comparison on that score. I hate the threat the Chinese Communist government poses to the United States of America, but I also know that the Chi-Coms produce about $500 billion in consumer goods that are sold in America. In fact, you probably heard me tell people who called the show when they say, I'm only going to buy American. I said, go to a store and try to find stuff that's not made in China. It's very difficult, and usually if you do, sadly, it's very expensive. If I declared one day, I'm not going to buy any more stuff from China, but then I explained that I'll still be buying consumer goods at U.S. stores. Imagine what a liar you would call me if I said, I'm not buying stuff from China, I'm buying it from Walmart. Now, that's what Ted Wheeler is trying to do as a workaround. And that's why I think they had scheduled the vote to happen today. I mean, the abortion law was put into place on Wednesday after the Supreme Court acted. On Friday, Ted Wheeler launched his own Shakespearean grenade, his petard, at this target that he wanted to hit, which is his support for abortion, because he'd like people to be talking about abortion instead of talking about the gigantic homicide rate in Portland. He'd rather not talk about Antifa, about BLM, about a city that's been taken over by homeless camps. He'd rather not talk about that stuff. He'd rather talk about something nice and safe, like a trade war with Texas. The problem is he declared the war, and literally City Hall Portland is now saying, we're going to put off that vote that we had planned for today, just a few days after Ted announced this crazy notion of a trade war between City Hall Portland and Texas on Friday, because we have to, literally they say in their announcement, because we have to figure out exactly what it does to us. This is the level of thinking at many of the city halls in the Pacific Northwest. I don't think Jenny Durkin in Seattle is any different. We're going to launch a bomb, and then we're going to say, exactly where did we throw that bomb to, and are we going to get blown up by our own bomb? In any case, just something to think about. Blackouts arrived in California this week, and they're coming to the Pacific Northwest soon. My take on that and the big raises for big unions for government workers, all coming up next.
That makes a lot of sense, a lot of nonsense.
Right, you're bloody well right. You know you got a right to say.
This is the Northwest Nonsense.
How much longer do we have to sit for this nonsense?
No left-leaning, dead fish wrapper bias. No mega TV network liberal agenda. Just the cold, hard facts from Lars.
Are you ready for blackouts here in the Pacific Northwest? Because they are coming. I've warned you about this before, but let me give you another warning because something brought this to mind this week. Forecast by the Northwest Regional Power Planning Agency put the likelihood of blackouts at 1 chance in 3 by 2023. Better odds than you'll find at Spirit Mountain or Alien A. An alert today reminded me of this. California's power system operator put out what's called a flex alert this morning. And no, that doesn't refer to your morning stretches. It says from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. today, Wednesday, all electric customers should set their air conditioning at, quote, 78 or higher. Avoid using all major appliances and even turn off all the lights you don't need. Just sit there and sweat in the dark. It should make dinner time very interesting. The alert goes on to warn, if you don't cut enough electric use voluntarily, then boom, 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 out go the lights. Actually, bureaucrats use this kind of language in their threats reducing energy use prevents further emergency measures like rotating power outages. Now, I've warned you, these rotating power outages, blackouts, and brownouts for the Northwest, they're actually forecast to be 1 chance in 3 by 2023. Oregon, Washington, and Idaho have already forced the closure of 2 major coal-fired power plants in just the last 2 years with no replacement power. 10 more plants around the West face closure in the next few years. Now, in a few moments, I'm going to be talking to a candidate for Oregon governor. And yesterday, Oregon governor candidate Stan Pulliam told me he would change this course. He would keep those plants that we have now going until we find something to replace them. I mean, call me crazy, but does it make any sense to shut down power plants and say, well, we're going to shut them down now. We have no idea what we're going to replace them with, but we'll figure it out when we need it. Well, it looks like California needs it already. Do you think that Kate Brown and Jay Inslee give a damn about this? Not a chance. They invented the coming power outages, and I'm sure their lights are not going to go out. Our question of the day comes in from Paul Morris, who wrote to me this morning. He said, just a comment. Millions of medical staff risked their lives working with COVID patients for a year before the vaccine. They were considered essential workers then. Are they not now? Said Paul Morris. Actually, I think it's a great question. I wish Kate Brown would come on the show and answer it for me. I'll ask Jim Huggins about that in a moment. And now today's Daily Grill.
Insane.
Are you completely insane?
Ridiculous.
They get more and more ridiculous.
Flat out dumb.
You're even dumber than I thought.
Who deserves today's Lars Grill of the Day?
Maybe they're just really, really stupid.
Find out right now. Brought to you by Les Schwab Tire Centers. Doing the right thing matters.
I love it when the light bulb goes on over the heads of liberal elites who are elected to public office. All of a sudden, in this case, the governor of Oregon figures out that too much state regulation can actually be a bad thing. I mean, ordinarily, liberals think more regulation is always good. In the face of a labor crisis in low-wage workers, including child care workers, Oregon Governor Kate Brown has issued an executive order. She didn't bother to go to the legislature with it, allowing unlicensed child care facilities in Oregon. In other words, the old-fashioned kind. According to the governor's executive order, because of the Delta variant, quote, these challenging circumstances highlight the critical importance of our child care infrastructure to support working parents, including parents who are health care providers and our youngest Oregonians. The executive order says an entity or individual can be approved to operate a temporary unlicensed emergency child care facility as authorized by order of the Early Learning Division if the entity meets and complies with all the requirements for emergency child care. Let me suggest something to you. When government starts figuring out we don't actually need that regulation when we really need child care more, well, why do we need all the regulation even when the emergency is over? Do you think that perhaps we could go back to some lighter licensing, lower the bar a bit? That will lower the price. It will increase the availability. It's the kind of thing that apparently Kate Brown thinks that less regulation is only necessary in an emergency, but during regular times, regulate to beat the band until you make stuff so expensive people can't afford it, and then offer them a government grant so they can afford it by taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other one. If that one makes sense to you, I'd be glad to talk to that naysayer. Today's best email, but you can always send more to talk@larslarson.com. Brought to you by River City Environmental, the leading environmental and emergency services company in the Northwest, now hiring with full benefits, leading pay, and a signing bonus. Online at rivercityusa.com/careers. Dustin writes in this case from Salem, but I'll bet there are contractors around the Northwest who could echo what he has to say. He said, Lars, I'm a contractor in Salem. We're signed up to bid on state contracts. I just got an email yesterday, and he attached the email saying the governor's mandate is extending, this is the vaccine mandate, all the way down to independent contractors who bid on state jobs. If I read this correctly, we are already short-staffed and we're unable to bid on larger projects. In fact, I just got a text call from the staffing agency I had lined up to send me a guy this morning. It's 6:30 in the morning. We're supposed to be on site at 7:30. Nobody wants to work already. How is this mandate helping? Thanks, Dustin in Salem. Dustin, I couldn't agree with you more. This is the kind of crisis that they're literally creating by government mandate. And I wish the government would address this. The governors of the two states have created a crisis. They're going to end up firing or pushing out of the business firefighters, nurses, doctors, paramedics, go right on down the list. And that's before you get to the non-emergency services like contractors who actually build things. So you've got government on one hand saying, gee, we're just so short of all the things we need, like housing and that sort of thing, and then turn around and they create the very crisis that they're trying to address. It makes no sense whatsoever. In any case, glad to have you with me on a Wednesday. Coming up in a moment, you're going to hear from one of the people who's running for Oregon governor. He's going to announce his run here on the show, just as we've had other candidates announce their runs for governor on this show. And I want to repeat the invitation, and I mean this seriously. There are times I sound like I'm joking, but I'm not joking in this case. If Tina Kotek, who is a prominent Democrat who apparently plans to run for Oregon governor, if she wanted to come on this show, I would give her exactly as much time. Maybe I'd even give her some more time. Because sometimes Democrats and liberals have to take a little extra time to explain why they do the things that they do. So in that case, I'll grant her a little bit of an edge, a little extra time to explain her take on these things, and I would let her announce her run for governor on this state or come on after she's announced her run for governor, as long as she's willing to answer the same questions that people like Stan Pulliam did yesterday. Jim Huggins is going to do today. Bridget Barton has announced on this show and answered questions. Is Tina Kotek willing to do that? Does she have the courage of her convictions to actually stand up and answer a tough question or two? Or is it just softballs from the Daily Dead fish wrapper that she's willing to go after? Our Twitter poll today, Joe Biden vows 40% solar in 12 years. Is that smart? I'll tell you why a little bit later on in the show, why I think that is really stupid. It's going to put the rest of the country in the same kind of energy emergency California is in today and the Pacific Northwest will be in shortly. You're listening to Wednesday on the Lars Larson Show. A candidate for Oregon governor coming up next to announce his campaign. You've got the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show on the Radio Northwest Network, proudly serving the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho for the last 21 years. You know, I've been talking about brownouts lately. The only brownout that I want to see happen is Kate Brown out of office, which sadly, I know, Jim, I do my best. My wife reminds me I'm not very funny, but I can try.
You are. That's great. That's great.
Well, I do want a Kate Brown out, and thank goodness, because of term limits, we will have a Kate Brown out. The voice you're hearing is Jim Huggins, husband, father, decorated veteran U.S. Air Force officer, award-winning filmmaker, and screenwriter on top of that, and now he'd like to be governor of Oregon. Jim, welcome to the program. That's the announcement you want to make today. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Lars. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. You're right. I'm not a politician. That's not anywhere in that list of accomplishments. I'm new to this. Yet I'm running for Oregon governor. I mean, simply put, things are out of control. You know it. I know it. Your listeners know it. We need to put some sort of sensibility back into our government.
I'm glad to hear you say it. So you're going to run for Oregon governor. You think you can win. You think you can win the nomination. You think you can beat the Democrat candidate who's likely to be one of them, at least, Tina Kotek.
Yes, I do believe that. We have a great team of strategists behind us. We know what the issues are. We're not going to run a Democrat-light campaign. We've seen the Republicans try to do that before.
Newt Buehler and company.
Newt Buehler's failed campaign. He had plenty of money. He's 10 points behind, and he decides to pick a topic that is opposition is in agreement with. So, I mean, how do you do something like that? What you do is you go find the issues that the voters actually care about, the ones that they're focused on. That's easy. Right now, there are, I don't know if your listeners know this or not, but there were 892 arrests during the Portland riots that Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Catch and Release Schmidt refused to prosecute. They were back on the streets rioting that night. That's why we had 100 nights of people being hurt, including the police, with businesses being firebombed, Portland being turned into another Tijuana, Mexico. As a governor, I would publicly call out the politicians who refuse to uphold the public order.
I'll tell you what, would you go past that? Jim, what I've tried to do is I want to give an equitable shot to everybody. Every one of the candidates are running. So I usually say, what are the issues? And you launched right into one major issue, and I'm glad you're talking about it. But let me ask you on that issue before we get to a few others, because you promised me 2 segments today, and I'm glad for the time. First, what's the website where people can find out more about your campaign? Because I don't want to forget about that. Go for it.
All right, great. Thank you. Make government do what it's supposed to do.com.
That's a great one. Now on top of that, I always worry about people staying in their lane, only because when somebody says, I'm going to run for Congress and then I'm going to fix the schools, I say most of the decisions about that are not made at the federal level. They're made at the state level or the local level on crime in cities. How far would you go other than the bully pulpit, which you just mentioned, you're going to get up and you're going to say, Ted Wheeler, you get out there and get this done. Beyond that, what are you willing to do beyond that, other than just berating this knucklehead who's running Portland right now? Just the way I think Jay Inslee should do it to Jenny Durkin.
Sure. Yeah, I get your point. To start with, though, we've got to at least get that bully pulpit going. It's not. People don't know what's really going on in Portland. And until that happens, you don't know what your next steps are going to be. You certainly have lots of options, but what ones make sense? Well, the first part is you've got to get the voters aware. You've got to get the people aware of what's going on, what decisions are being made that impact them. The people can have a tremendous impact if they're informed. They're not. And without that information, there's no way any other action is going to be completely successful.
Well, let me ask you a second one.
Kate Brown's doing now with mandates.
I get that too. But are you willing to send the state police in and say to a mayor of any city in Oregon, if you won't enforce the law, even though the state police are severely understaffed right now, would you at least say, I'm going to send a bunch of state police in and they're going to start enforcing the law if you won't do it?
We would take a look at being able to do that and work with them if they're going to. If they're not, you've got other issues that you've got to take a look at from the public safety, and the governor's office is going to have to consider all options. Would I do that? That would certainly be one I would consider. Is it my first choice? No, it would not be. That's not how you work with people. But you still have to be the top law enforcement executive of the executive branch. You're responsible for the legal aspect here, not from prosecuting, but you are responsible for enforcing the laws.
All right. Now, you've also said you're going to address homelessness. I want to hear the solution to this problem, because the first time I watched politicians announce their 10-year plan to end homelessness was in May of 1980. And they had a 10-year plan, and it is now 40-plus years later. The problem is bigger than ever. It is better funded than ever, and it is more of a problem than it ever was before. It didn't end it. How does a governor do that?
Well, it didn't end it, because what it did was it simply enabled it and created a profit environment for all of those dollars. I mean, we're spending hundreds of millions of tax dollars to pay for a bureaucracy that is simply moving our homeless camps from one place to another. So one of the first things you've got to do, and one of the first things I'll do, is I'm going to forbid the illegal camping on public and private property. I'm not going to tolerate the garbage, the rats, the abandoned drug needles, and all of that ultimately resulting in absolutely unheard of criminal activity. There's a lot going on in that culture that needs to be addressed. And if the legislature's not going to go along with that, well, again, you start with by specifically pointing out which legislators are kicking the can down the road that creates this bureaucracy. Then we're going to see how they live with the political fallout, because I think once the voters know who's responsible and what's really going on, I'm betting the politicians are going to get that message. So the first thing you have to do, again, is you have to educate folks to know, hey, this is where your money's going. It's not doing what you think. We need to make a change.
I'm talking to Jim Huggins, who's just announced, he's an Air Force veteran. He's just announced his run as a Republican, I take it, for governor of Oregon. You would probably be saddled with a Democrat majority legislature as governor. Do you think that's the reality after next fall, or do you think we'll have a Republican majority for the first time in 30 years in both houses?
It's a really great question, Lars. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't think we'll have a supermajority. I think we'd still have a majority on the Democrat side. because I don't know if the Republicans are going to be able to mount a serious enough campaign across the state to be able to get those representatives in there. I hope they would, and I would certainly do all I could to help that. But whether we have a majority or not, I believe we would by 2024. I think we'll get back to where we need to be. Ideally, we need to have balance in the legislature. The system was set up for two parties. It wasn't set up to be dominated by one or the other. And right now, we haven't had a Republican governor in 39 years. We need to get that pendulum swinging back in the other direction. I think we're going to make a significant advantage on that.
But in the short run, Jim, you're going to have to, if you became governor, you would have to make these changes and get all this done without any help from the folks in the legislature, right?
That's correct. That's correct. That's where the help from the voters, the people, the Oregonians out there that know what's going on, they're going to be the big difference. That's the secret weapon, if you will, in this warfare. There are 4.3 million Oregonians that are not being adequately represented, and we're going to change that.
All right. So how do you change that? How do you bring that about?
Well, as I said, one of the things that you have to do is you have to publicly point out who is doing what in the Senate. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican. If you're a Republican, you make stupid decisions and make foolish actions on this, we're going to point you out. Well, I don't care who you are. People need to understand what's going on in the legislature, and I think, Lars, with a supermajority, it's a lot easier to keep things under wraps. But regardless, we are not sharing that information, and we need to have a leader that's going to do that. We don't.
Okay, we're talking to Jim Huggins. We're going to be back in a moment. He's announced his run for Oregon governor. You've now heard 3 candidates announce their run for Oregon governor on this program. We'll continue this conversation with him in just a moment. You're listening to the Radio Northwest Network and the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. Jim Huggins is with me. He's just announced his run for Oregon governor. We've been featuring candidates who are doing that. All of them so far have been conservatives, although I'm willing to entertain independents and liberals as well. I'll give them the same treatment and the same amount of time. So, Jim, if you don't mind, I want to knock through a bunch of really consequential issues. Let's start with the forest fires. We seem to see about 500,000 acres of forest in Oregon go up in flames almost every year. Some of that's on state land, very little on private land, a whole lot on federal land. What would you as governor do to stop that?
I'd insist we actually have a plan for managing our forests that makes sense.
And how? And what do you mean specifically? Because
You have a Department of Forestry that was given a directive by our current governor. They've ignored it. They've kicked the can down the road. The point is we don't have the representation that actually understands the issues, and that's where we need to get that taken care of.
Okay, because a lot of your answers seem, Jim, to come back to either the public doesn't understand or the bureaucracy doesn't understand. I actually think the Forestry Department understands the issue. They understand what they could cut. They understand that they're not going to do it because they've had tree huggers in charge who don't want to cut trees down. They'd rather see them burn. So I'm not sure it's a matter of just educating the Forestry Department about what they could do to properly manage a forest. So how do you actually make that happen?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lars. I didn't mean to step on you there. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head on educating the bureaucracy. Oregon isn't blue. Voters in a blue state, they don't limit bloated property taxes. They don't turn down sales taxes. They don't allow early release of violent criminals, and they don't repeal giving illegal aliens driver's license. We're a lot more red than our representatives in the bureaucracy realize, and
Agreed.
That's a big part of the issue, and they've got to understand that. So, yeah, you're right. Bureaucracy on this one is where the issue is. They don't understand what they need to do on it. As a governor, you need to enable that conversation, enable that education between the people, because it's not happening. There's a tremendous distrust of the government bureaucracy to begin with. First thing you got to do is fix that. You can't look to the governor to be, the person that issues all these mandates to fix everything. That's not how government's supposed to work. That's not what it's supposed to do. We have people out there that are demonstrating this is a red state, and we need a bureaucracy that understands that.
See, I think, I may differ with you on that, Jim, because I think if you're the chief executive of a state and you look at the bureaucracy and you say, these people know exactly what they're doing. Some of them are very crafty about doing things that deliberately subvert the will of the people. So if you as governor say, hey, this bureaucracy is not acting the way the people of the state want it to act, I think it is your job to issue edicts and mandates to bureaucracy, not to the people, but to bureaucracy.
Correct.
To say, hey,
Correct.
State Department of Forestry, people in Oregon want those trees logged and replanted and cared for, and we want the fires put out right now, because if you've already drawn and I think it's a proper conclusion, the people of the state are relatively red. One of the ones that just within the last decade, they voted down gay marriage. And then the Supreme Court came along and imposed it. And you said, well, okay, this is a conservative state. And you mentioned voting down illegal alien driver's licenses, which the legislature turned around and said yes to anyway, again. So when the bureaucracy does that and it doesn't represent the people of the state, I think it's incumbent on a governor to order them to do otherwise.
I would agree with you on ordering the bureaucracy. Thank you for that clarification. We've been living under these mandates from Kate Brown for so long. I'm just used to when somebody says mandates that it's all, heavy-handed over the citizenry, and that's not correct. But no, it is up to the chief executive, the leader, to establish that leadership role with the bureaucracy. Hey, guys, we're not doing what we need to be doing. You don't issue the mandates over to the people, though.
I mean, imagine if all the owners of Nike stock said, we're sick and tired of Colin Kaepernick, then the board of directors should say, then get rid of Colin Kaepernick. Apparently, both the stockholders and the board of directors are okay with Kaepernick and his nonsense. Let me get to the mandates then. Do you believe the governor has the authority, Jim Huggins? And I'll let you mention the website again in a moment because we're going to run out of time. Do you believe the governor has the authority to order people vaccinated, the people that she has ordered vaccinated, and order them to wear masks?
No, I don't. Not under a non-emergency order environment. No, they don't. And I think the emergency order environment that we have is contrived at this point. So, no, I don't agree with that.
All right, fair enough. I want to ask you about energy. I started today by pointing out that California has just advised its citizens either voluntarily conserve right now, and they mean tonight, between 4 and 9 p.m., or we're going to have rolling blackouts and rolling brownouts. That is happening right now. Oregon is headed for the same fate. I want to know what you as governor would do about it to change that. And just talking to people and saying this is a big problem, they'll all know it's a problem when the lights go out. What does the governor actually do to change that?
Well, to start with, you forbid the power shutdowns. That's ludicrous. You demand that there is a plan and an understanding of what we need to be doing. You don't just start turning the power out. That is one.
Well, if there isn't enough, okay, but Jim, just to fine tune that question, the governors have all said we want these coal-fired plants shut down. When people say, well, what's going to replace them? We don't know, but shut the coal-fired plants down. Would you reverse that?
If you need those plants running, yes, you'd have to until there's a reasonable plan. You just don't start turning the lights off only because you don't like what you have. You've got to plan for it and come up with a better solution than just shutting power off.
We're coming to the end of this segment.
Agree that's going to go to war over.
I know we're going to talk to you again. Tell everybody where to find you on your website.
Yeah, you can go to makegovernmentdowhatit'ssupposed-to-do.com.
Jim, good luck to you. That's Jim Huggins, who just 30 minutes ago announced his candidacy for Oregon governor. As I've said, the Democrats are welcome as well. And when Washington State has its governor's election, we'll cover that one as well. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get to your phone calls and emails. Check out our Twitter poll question today at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and LarsLarson.com, our website that doesn't have all that nasty Twitter censorship that they get up to. You can also vote in that. Glad to have you do it, and it's brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at ultimatetruckservice.com. It's always a pleasure to welcome back to the program the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nigel Jake was from Willamette Week to talk about a story. Maybe Nigel got a better take on this group than I did when I talked to them. Nigel, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lars.
So what is this group, People for Portland, really up to? Because I frankly don't get it. I mean, they've said, look, the city has a lot of problems. Yes, it's pretty obvious it does. So does Seattle. The politicians aren't solving it. In fact, in many cases, I think they're making the problems worse. So People for Portland says, we're going to come in and try and help fix some of these things. What exactly are they up to?
Well, I think this goes back to something you and I have discussed for years, which is that if you go to a city council meeting or a county commission meeting or a metro council meeting, there are 5 members of city council, 5 members of Multnomah County. They're all Democrats. They're all in a pretty ideological spectrum. There's very little dissent or disagreement. And so taxpayers have voted to give all three of those agencies a lot of money in the past 5 years or less to try and solve some of the problems on the streets of homelessness and other issues that we see, and the problems are not getting solved. In fact, they're getting worse. And so I think the question this group is trying to answer is, how do you put pressure on elected officials in a one-party city to feel a sense of urgency that a lot of citizens feel? So, I think you and I and other people who've covered politics for years would be skeptical of any new group that shows up. What do they really want? I actually, perhaps naively, believe that they actually really want what they say they want.
Well, because I think what you kind of nodded at, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I hate it when people do it to me, but, if you have no creative tension, that sounds like kind of a lefty expression, but what I mean by that is if you have a bunch of conservatives on a city council, county commission, board of directors, whatever it is, and you have a bunch of liberals or people from one side of an issue and the other side of the issue, you get some creative tension. Somebody says, here, let's solve it this way. And whoever's on the other side says, no, it'd be better if you did it that way. And you end up with a solution that reflects a little bit of both, and you get some testing of the ideas. If they're all true believers to the left, then, whether they think their ideas are great or not, they never get tested. They never get questioned. And nobody, if they're all sort of in the same ideological bunch, nobody wants to call them and say, hey, Nigel, that idea of yours didn't work very well. Let's throw it out. Because, of course, they're all on the same side of the political spectrum. So why would they fight about, why? And I think, frankly, fights in that case actually produce some better solutions than everybody singing Kumbaya together.
Yeah, I mean, look, the voters in 2020 voted to give Metro $2.5 billion over 10 years to address chronic homelessness. Now, governments can go out and borrow months against that money from day one. They could have put that money on the street the day after the election. But they haven't put any of that money on the street yet. It's more than a year later. They're just starting to do it now. I think that is the best example to me of where everybody can acknowledge there's a big problem on the streets in terms of houselessness, homelessness, and that problem requires money to solve. So voters gave them a ton of money, a lot of money, and they basically have done almost nothing with it. And I think that is the best example to me of why this group exists, because they won't tell us who's funding them. And frankly, I don't think that's as important as what they're trying to accomplish. And I think one of the things that one of the political consultants said to us is, we're trying to make these people feel like there's an election every day. We're trying to put pressure on them that they don't currently feel. And we believe, as two guys who've been running campaigns for 30 years, those guys said, that politicians intensely internalize, they feel the criticism, and they're trying to put some heat on them.
Well, do you think part of it is they get so tied up in process? You've got this giant pile of money. You've got a job that clearly needs to be done now, not 5 years from now. And yet you say, well, if we're going to spend that much money, we're going to have to sit down and really, think this through and plan it. And then they'll come up with a big 4-color brochure, 2 years from now, and they'll have a giant plan, most of which probably won't happen, but they'll have planned the daylights out of it. And we'll get the solution that'll actually start having an effect 4, 5, or 6, or 10 years from now. Do you think it's unfair to describe it that way? Because I think that's how we got to an unemployment system computer where the Congress gave, Kate Brown $100 million and said, hey, you got busted computers, fix them. And the money is still sitting there in the bank 10 years later.
So Multnomah County put together, each of the 3 counties has responsibility to put together their own plan for what this Metro money, this $250 million a year, is going to be spent on. Multnomah County put together a 26-person committee that took a year to come up with a 270-page plan. So, no, you're not being unfair. That's exactly what's happening. They're processing the hell out of this. And while that was frustrating and slow and ridiculous, Washington County and Clackamas County did even less. They didn't even do that much. So, no, I mean, there was a sense of urgency to pass this bond measure, and they passed it because voters feel urgency. Once the money arrived, that urgency seems to have completely disappeared. And again, I think, this is a group, we don't know where their money's coming from. We don't know what the end game, the ultimate end game is. But in the meantime, they're saying, Jesus Christ, guys, let's feel a little urgency here. And I think that's a good thing.
All right. One moment, if you would, on what's the skinny on this guy who intends to replace Joanne Hardesty, the most radical member, I think arguably the most radical politician in the entire region.
Well, we reported today that a guy named Vadim, and I'll mispronounce his last name, he was born in Ukraine, it's Mazursky, who's actually got a pretty interesting resume. He grew up in Houston, went to law school at the University of Texas, moved here 7 years ago. He's on the city's Charter Review Commission, which is trying to reform our archaic form of government. He's on a couple of police oversight panels. He's in his neighborhood association. He belongs to the board of the immigrant refugee organization, IRCO. So the guy's got a very solid resume, and it looks to me like he is going to go right at Commissioner Hardesty's position on police, which, as you know, has been to reform them and reduce their numbers and to get rid of the gun violence task force, all of which have happened. And although this guy is a Democrat and looks like he's, pretty progressive on a lot of things, he clearly, in his interview with me, staked out a position to Hardesty's right on policing and said, we've got a big problem. We've had 90 murders in the past 12 months. We've had 830 shootings, and the response of the city council is ridiculous. It's to give more money to unarmed park rangers.
I would love to see somebody go after Joanne Hardesty and remove her from the city council and every other elected position in the state, frankly, in the region. That's Nigel Jaquist. You can read the story at WWeek.com. Coming up, it turns out the vaccine mandate for cops may not be legal. We'll get to that in your phone calls coming up.
As of now, the Taliban are not permitting the charter flights to depart. They claim that some of the passengers do not have the required documentation. While there are limits to what we can do without personnel on the ground, without an airport with normal security and procedures in place, we are working to do everything in our power to support those flights and to get them off the ground.
Now, that is the Secretary of State of the United States. He works for Joe Biden. His name is Anthony Blinken. And do you know what he just admitted? We have a hostage situation. It involves Americans on the ground, ready to be loaded up on planes or already on planes. And the Taliban says, I'm sorry, your paperwork's not in order. You can't leave our wonderful country now under Taliban control. And what is the Biden administration going to do about it? Let me give you one indication of what a bunch of knuckleheads we have in the State Department. And that's saying something, because the State Department in both Republican and Democrat administrations seems to be staffed, in many cases, by a bunch of knuckleheads. But do you know what they came out with yesterday? TheHill.com, which is one of the two big online publications that covers Capitol Hill. TheHill.com says the State Department has reached out and said to the Taliban, we don't understand. We think you should have more women in your government, and we want you to have a more inclusive government. Now, remember, they're talking to Sharia law Muslims who don't believe women have any role in elective office, in work, or even walking outside their house unless they're accompanied by a male member of their family. And the Biden administration says, you got to get more diversity in there. We need more women in your government. And the Taliban is going to do that. And they're wondering why they have a problem getting Americans off the ground. I told you a couple of weeks ago when I said these people are effectively hostage. The minute American soldiers, service members leave the ground in Afghanistan, if you're leaving behind hundreds of people, including, I think, a couple of dozen kids from the Sacramento area who were there on some kind of school trip, when you leave them behind, they are effectively hostages of the Taliban government. And all Joe Biden can say is, well, we really hope that the Taliban sticks to its word and the commitments they've made. The president of the United States is not only negotiating with terrorists, he's acting as though you can depend on the promises of terrorists. That's the crazy situation we're up against. Now, let's get to your calls. If you want to join the best conversation here in the Pacific Northwest, all you've got to do is dial me up at 866-HEY-LARS. Naysayers always go to the head of the line. As long as you understand, if you call in as a naysayer, I want you to make your point right up front. I'll give you all the time you need. And then you have to answer just a few questions. You can also vote in our Twitter poll. Joe Biden said today 40% solar in America in 12 years. That will take a tenfold increase. So we have to increase the amount of solar in this country 10 times in the next 12 years. The first little bit of solar that we've got in this country has cost us hundreds of billions of dollars in federal subsidies, and it took us decades to get here. Will we be able to add 40% solar in the next 12 years? I don't think that's possible. I think it's going to leave a lot of us in the dark. California, as of today, is being told by its power authorities, California pushed hard on wind and solar, and now they're telling people, turn off all your major appliances from 4 to 9 o'clock tonight. I assume that means charging your cute little battery car as well. So don't cook dinner, don't run the air conditioner, or no, actually they said you can run your air conditioner, just set the thermostat to 70. I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating. This is the advisory they put out, 78 degrees or higher. That's what it said in the announcement today. And I've warned you, the Pacific Northwest is on track within a couple of years to be in the same boat that California is in today. And I want it asked of every single person running for office, what are you going to do? And when they say, well, we'll study it or we'll get together with a bunch, no. You've got a region that did depend on 12 coal-fired electric plants. The two of them in the region that have already been shut down, 10 more slated for shutdown. If you continue the shutdown of those plants with nothing to replace them, you will end up, at least this time of year, sweating in the dark with no dinner. Okay, that's what it is, sweating in the dark with no dinner. Now, if that sounds appealing to you because you're doing your part to save planet Earth, then call up as a naysayer and tell me why. Let's go to Ben in Redmond. Hey, Ben, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Hi, Lars. How you doing?
I'm doing well. What's up?
So the one thing I wanted to bring up is I'm not a naysayer per se, but like your last interview, it feels anytime we've got conservative, at least in Oregon, we don't have high energy conservatives like yourself or anybody else that ever runs for office. We've got these rhinos. I guess, what do we do to start getting the message out more than just even over the radio? Just anytime we get somebody out there running for public office, they go middle of the road instead of actually fighting for what needs to happen. And like I said, your last interviewer, he was just like super low energy and he had good points.
Well, he's not a politician. He's a reporter. Nigel is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter because he sticks to his job as a reporter. When I was a reporter, I kept my opinion out of my stories. And I remember there was a time where I was both acting as a reporter and as a talk show host, and people would say, well, you can't do both jobs. I said, why not? And they said, well, because your opinion will be in the stories. And I said, show me one story in 20 years in television in which I let my opinion leak into the story. And they said, well, you don't let your opinion into the story. As a reporter, it's his job not to have opinions or energy or anything else. He's not running for public office. He's just describing what he's seeing and actually reporting accurately. There are too many reporters who put a lot of energy into their reporting and they become advocates. Well, as a reporter, I wasn't an advocate. I would just tell the story, and what people did with it was up to them. As doing what I do now, I put my opinion in, I advocate for some things, I advocate against other things. You want people to run for public office. And right now, Ben, for conservatives, it's kind of a thankless task because you're going to run, and in all likelihood, the first few dozen conservatives you run are going to lose. But at some point, we'll get a win. And in fact, I appreciate the optimism of Jim Huggins saying, well, we should be able to get the Oregon legislature back to more of a mixed group of Republican conservatives and liberals by 2024. If that happens, I'll be the happiest guy around. But do I think it's likely? I don't. It's going to be tough. And it's tough to get people interested in running when you say, well, if I run, what's going to happen? They say, well, in all likelihood, you're going to lose. And then you're going to run again. And then you're going to lose. And eventually, you may win. But it's going to be really tough. You're not going to see, shining light in a rainbow that announces that conservatives have already all of a sudden begun winning, especially because in the Pacific Northwest, we've got all vote by mail, and it's extraordinarily easy for the Democrats to cheat.
Well, the problem is we've got rhinos in Oregon, too.
Yeah, we do. Because they think, well, if I'm in a
Go ahead.
Oh,
they always want to go to the left, thinking that they're going to be the golden boys of the media, and then they lose. Because
but don't hold it all against them, Ben, because if you're in a state that's mostly liberals and some independents, and you say, I'm going to run hard to the right, you're not going to get any Democrats, and you're not either if you run as a rhino, but you may not get any independents either. You'll stick to your principles, but you may well lose, and that's the equation. Sad to say, but that is the equation. Glad to be with you on a Wednesday. Back in just a moment. You've got the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I want to tell you something. These vaccine mandates and the mask mandates, but mostly the vaccine mandates, are tremendously destructive. I've been hearing over the last several weeks from doctors, from nurses, from individuals who are paramedics, who are firefighters, who are police officers, who are all looking at losing their jobs because of vaccine mandates. It's almost as though the liberals cannot get enough crisis out of the current pandemic as it stands, so they've decided to amplify the crisis by getting rid of some of the most critical jobs that are done in any society, getting rid of the cops, the firefighters, the paramedics, the doctors, the nurses. And now it turns out that some people are getting fired for even asking about what their company's stance is on religion, vaccination, and the Equality Act. David Hacker joins me now. He's an attorney with a group that we've recommended to a number of people called the First Liberty Institute. David, it's good to have you back on the program.
Thanks for having me on, Lars.
So tell me what the state of the law is on this, as you have Americans who are being told, take the jab or you lose your job. No exceptions. Oh, yes, we have a vaccine mandate, but don't you dare even ask about it.
That's right. Well, most Americans are covered by the Federal Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employers from discriminating against them based on their religious beliefs. And what we have here with our Alaska Airlines case is essentially the canceling of employees who, like you said, simply asked a question as to why the company was publicly supporting the Equality Act.
And so they asked the question, and the boss says, that's it. You're either terminated or we're going to keep you on the rolls, but we're not going to schedule you for any shifts. Is that what happened?
Well, it actually wasn't even as good as that, Lars. They actually simply asked the question on this online employee portal where employees could, have discussions and such. And Alaska turned around and took them off their flight duties, did a very short investigation that was extremely one-sided in favor of the company, and then terminated their employment. And that was it, simply for asking a question about why the company supported something. And, the idea that your employer can fire you for simply asking a question about an important cultural issue, I mean, that should be disturbing to all Americans.
Well, it's disturbing to me, David, especially when they get sucked into a trap. If the company has said this is the place where if you're an employee, you can ask questions about why the company is doing business the way it does business. So I imagine Alaska gets asked about where it obtains its fuel and how green its jets are and all kinds of nonsense like that, and maybe even more pedestrian issues than that. And then when you actually ask a substantial question, you get fired for asking the question. That can't be legal, or is it?
No, it's not legal. And in fact, it makes a mockery of our federal civil rights laws that protect religious Americans from discrimination and hostile environments in the workplace. It's a blatant violation of these laws for a company to discriminate against an employee simply because of their religious beliefs and expression in the workplace.
Well, David, I've been getting a lot of people calling and emailing and saying, we gotta know who to go to. And I usually tell them, look, you can go to a lawyer, but lawyer answers and court answers usually take long periods of time. And a lot of these people don't have a lot of time. They're telling me, listen, I've been working at this company or government agency for decades. I may be retiring in a year or two. And they're telling me, do this now or you're out the door. What do I do right now? Is there any kind of answer that's going to be satisfactory to somebody who's facing termination?
Yeah, it's a scary prospect when somebody's facing that. if they're dealing with a vaccine mandate at work, they can go to our website, firstliberty.org, and we have a vaccine toolkit they can download for free. Helps them walk through the law and understand what their rights are. Helps provide a couple sample accommodation letters they can submit to their employers. Or if they're dealing with this sort of cancel culture issue with our Alaska Airlines case, where they're not even being allowed to, live out their faith at work, again, they need to contact us at firstliberty.org and let us know, because we want to ensure that employers honor their obligations under federal law to protect religious Americans from discrimination in the workplace.
David, I've never believed that, that you get anywhere by being at a job and having to have the kind of relationship where you say, I might call my lawyer or I'm going to send you a letter. But I think circumstances like this are exactly the case where that rule of mine would go out the window. I mean, I don't like it when people say, well, if you don't do something, I'm going to call my union rep, or I'm going to file a complaint, or I'm going to go to the EEOC, because if you do that on a regular basis, it's not necessarily good for your long-term career. But on a short-term basis like this, are some of these tools that, and you're offering this up because First Liberty Institute is not a private company. It's a funded, I don't want to call you a charity, but you're an organization that is funded by people who believe in these liberties and want them taken care of. So to a large extent, you don't charge people for this advice. You don't charge them for the toolkit that they find on your website, right? And could somebody get a letter there and say to the boss, if you're going to fire me for asking a question, here's my official letter, a little bit of a shot across the bow saying, boss, you're walking into legally dangerous territory if you take this action against me. Is that a possible outcome of that? The boss looks at it, calls the company's lawyer. The company's lawyer maybe says, maybe we want to back off a little bit here.
Yeah, that's right. We defend religious liberty for all Americans, and we are a nonprofit organization. And so if somebody contacts us for help with that kind of a situation, we represent them for free if we're able to help them. And we often send letters to governmental entities or corporations pointing out when they don't honor their obligations to protect the rights of religious Americans the same as everyone else. And we'd be happy to do that for anyone that contacts us. And, when it comes to the vaccine mandates, we have this handy toolkit they can look at. They can craft their own religious accommodation request. They can talk to our lawyers if need be. And all of that is free, and people can go to firstliberty.org to get that help.
Okay, so David, as you can tell, I'm not a lawyer, but let me ask you, getting into the law a little bit on this, can we accurately say that a lot of these actors like Alaska Airlines, I like Alaska generically, I don't have any stock, I mean, I've flown on the airplane plenty of times, but I don't get any freebies from them, so I don't have a dog in the fight there, but could we say that they're acting as an agent of the government? Because clearly the governments, especially in Alaska's, hometown of Seattle, the governments are pressing companies hard. We want you to push these mandates on people. And these are highly regulated companies. I mean, they operate at the behest of federal regulators and state regulators and the rest. And I understand why they feel like they can't get sideways. In that kind of case, where the government is forbidden to do something, say, to an employee, but they push a private company to do it, and the company knows we don't go along with the government, they can put us out of business real quick. Could we make the argument that they're acting as agents of the government legally?
Well, that might be a bridge too far, Lars, but what we can say is that Alaska Airlines is being told by the federal government, and has been told this for over 60 years, that when it comes to treating your employees fairly in the workplace, you can't discriminate based on religion. You can't create a hostile environment that causes religious people to fear losing their jobs, or to actually lose their jobs, like in this case with Lacey Smith at Alaska Airlines. And so the government here is actually telling the airline, you need to protect the rights of your employees to believe what they want to believe and express themselves at work. And especially here, when Alaska was inviting this kind of comment and input on its support for this piece of federal legislation.
Absolutely right. That's David Hacker. He's an attorney with the First Liberty Institute. That's where you go, First Liberty Institute. Coming up, I think Joe Biden's State Department has gone crazy. Wow, we'll get to it next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. This one was kind of stunning to me, and I'd love to hear a naysayer actually make sense of this thing. But I think that Joe Biden's State Department has gone absolutely crazy. Now, I mentioned a bit of this earlier this hour, but this is how crazy they are. The State Department, this is from thehill.com. The State Department on Tuesday, yesterday, expressed concern over the makeup of the new interim Afghan government announced by the Taliban, including the lack of female leaders and the past actions of some of those appointed to top posts. Well, some of the Taliban leadership were actually guests at Gitmo not that long ago, if that tells you something about their background. A State Department spokesperson said in a statement shared with The Hill that although the Taliban, quote, has presented this as a caretaker cabinet, meaning that it'll be replaced by a more permanent cabinet later on to run the country, that the U.S. will judge the Taliban by its actions and not by its words. We've made clear our expectation that the Afghan people deserve an inclusive government. The statement goes on to note the list of names announced by the Taliban earlier yesterday consists exclusively of individuals who are members of the Taliban or their close associates, meaning they're all members of a terrorist organization, and it includes no women. And they say they have specifically called on the Taliban to include more women in their government. Now, I think women in government are fine. I mean, not Liz Cheney. She can go, but that's politics, not gender. But there are an awful lot of women in government who do a fantastic job in America. In a Sharia Muslim law country like Afghanistan is now under the Taliban, the Biden State Department actually believes that a group of people who think women have almost no role whatsoever, that they're not allowed to work, that you can't see their faces, all this stuff, all this nonsense that comes under Sharia law, that group is going to put women in the government? They must be smoking something weird at the Biden State Department right now. On that note, let's go to a naysayer. We always put naysayers first. Greg is on the line. Greg, thanks for listening on the Radio Northwest Network. What's on your mind today, and what do we disagree about?
Lars, love your show. Real quickly, yesterday you had a conversation with Social Security towards the end of your show.
Yeah.
I've kind of had a conversation with you before in reference to unions versus you having lawyers and, people to negotiate your contracts. That's another day. But what I had a problem with is the lack of information on the show yesterday about Social Security. She failed to put in there that we were going to be insolvent in 2027 due to Trump's policies and everything. When everybody was working, we gained 5 years of
to
economic
2032 or 33, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you say that it's a Ponzi scheme. Well, it's not a Ponzi scheme that most middle-income people. You're way above that, and most people can. And I don't down that. My aunt and uncle are wealthy, and they give their Social Security check to the church.
It's not about
every
wealth,
month.
though. Greg, do you know what a Ponzi scheme is?
I sure do.
Oh, you do. For anybody who doesn't, let me just do a short explanation.
It's a shell game.
Well, no, it's not just a shell game. What it means is I get 10 investors. They each give me $100, so I have $1,000. Now I want to attract some new investors. And how do I pay off my first 10 investors to keep them happy so they don't, go to the cops? Well, I take, say, 50 new investors, and I get $5,000 from them, and I use that to pay the first people who are already invested. Now, this only works till you run out of investors, and any Ponzi scheme fairly quickly runs out of investors because you've promised massive return on an investment that isn't real. You're not investing in anything. You're just getting new dollars in from new investors and using it to pay off your existing investors. So even if you only start with 10, you then need 20 or 30 more investors to pay off the 10. Then you need, 100 to pay off those 30, and you run out of money. The reason I say
that's incorrect. That's incorrect.
What's incorrect?
That's incorrect.
What's incorrect?
What's incorrect about it is that I've paid into it for over 40 years.
And your money was spent.
Well, it may be, but nevertheless, I put that money in. Now, lucky enough for our Congress and everything, years ago passed a thing saying that we cannot borrow to make Social Security successful because they had squandered so many dollars from it that they didn't want to have to pay it back.
They borrowed.
Now, what the problem is, now, Mr. Edelman, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can mention names, but Mr.
Greg,
Edelman, a financial genius, Okay, a financial genius came up with a plan last Sunday because he talked about it too. If we start paying when kids are first born into the system, that money can be used. But
Greg,
you want to rely on a 401k. I have a buddy that had a 401k.
Greg, hold on. Now you're going way off. Let's stick with.
No, I'm not.
Well, you started with Social Security. Where are we going now? Because
I'm saying there's plenty of ways to solve
run out of
it.
time.
It's taking money from people.
But Greg, here's the problem. Your money that you paid in decades ago was spent immediately, okay? And as of today, Social Security does not bring in enough dollars from workers like me and you to pay the people who are currently collecting. The Congress has to supplement that, meaning the system is already running out of money. So the Congress has to keep making up the shortfall. By the time we get to 2032 or 33, it's not important which day, it's coming soon, is enough to say that there's no way to make that system solvent. What you'd have to do is
how did we get from 2027 to 2033?
Because you had some more collections, you had a more vigorous economy, you're paying a bit more money in, but the problem is it is already short of money to pay what it's paying out right now. By 2032, they're going to have to cut the benefits by 22% just to keep writing some checks to some of the recipients. And that's the bottom line. You got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome back to the Radio Northwest Network. It is a pleasure to be with you on a Wednesday, and always glad to take your phone calls and emails. And as you know, naysayers go to the head of the line on this show. You can answer our Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show, or if you don't like Twitter, go to larslarson.com. Today's question, Joe Biden vows 40% solar in 12 years. Is that smart? No, it's not only smart, it'll bankrupt the country. It'll leave us all in the dark. And depending on the time of year, either sweating in the dark or freezing in the dark. But that's an issue for another day. You can find the Twitter poll at Lars Larson Show, and brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at ultimatetruckservice.com. Now, I want to talk about vaccine mandates just a bit, and it turns out that the government really put its foot in it when it said, we're going to start mandating that everybody has to be vaccinated. Now, they're pushing it out through private companies, they're pushing it out through public employees, and they're pushing a lot of doctors, nurses, cops, firefighters, paramedics right out the door. And now I've been alerted that it's also being pressed through state government and city governments who are saying, if you want to bid on any of our jobs, your people are all mandated to be vaccinated. And Senator Jeff Wilson from Washington State has taken this issue on because we're already starting to see the inequities that are popping up because some unions can negotiate a compromise and other unions cannot. Senator Wilson, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Lars. Pleasure to be here today.
Would you mind telling my audience what's happening here where people like Jay Inslee, and I also, have to speak for Kate Brown as well, that they are watching unions walk in and say, we're going to negotiate a different deal on vaccine mandates than other unions are getting. How are they doing that, and why is that happening?
Well, I don't know. I know it clearly demonstrates a path of almost hypocrisy and cruelty to those that obviously don't have a union that's organized. But, Lars, I'm a senator. I represent a union of 154,000 people. I didn't get the memo that mandates were negotiable. Had I gotten that memo, I think we would have all maybe considered filing a lawsuit in order to get the governor's ear and then negotiate our own special deal on behalf of our union.
Yeah, and what you're saying, as I understand it, you've raised a really important issue, that when some unions can walk in and say, we're not doing this, and you're not doing this to our members, but other unions don't have that kind of horsepower, either in Olympia or Salem or at the city governments or county governments, all of a sudden you've got all kinds of people who are being treated differently under what is supposed to be a mandate. I don't agree with the mandates. So I have a bias in this. But if you're going to lay down a mandate, it should hit everyone. And now we're finding out some of the animals are more equal than others, to use an Orwell expression.
Very well said, Lars. And especially because these mandates, we've been told, come on, they're based on science. However, there obviously is different types of science being applied to this. And really now we're headed towards the big group of calling this political science play. But it's at the expense of confusing and creating chaos now amongst us in Washington. I'm an elected official, and what did I get elected for, Lars? I've been put on mute.
Yeah, you have been, because the governors don't seem to be consulting with the people's representatives, because, it's a whole lot easier to do government if you just act like a king or a queen or a dictator or a tyrant and just say, this is the way it's going to be. I don't have to talk to the people's representatives about this. And apparently some of the people's representatives, I think not from your party, the Republican Party, but from the other party, are saying, yeah, Jay, you go ahead. You got the ball. You're carrying it. We'd rather not be asked what our position is, because it's probably a lot easier as a Democrat to say, Jay's calling the shots. We're not really involved, and sell out all of your constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a heartbreaking thing when elected people are no longer allowed to represent those through an elected process. But, if you give $1.6 million to a governor's reelection campaign, maybe that helps in getting an ear. And then all you need to do later on is get an attorney and sue him. And then you get a chance to discuss something that I thought was not compromisable. I thought a mandate was a mandate, but I certainly was proven wrong, Lars. There are definitely two sets of standards operating in Washington state as we speak.
So, Senator, I want you to do me the favor of calling out the union by name. What union is it that's been able to negotiate concessions while the other unions and the underrepresented people just get whatever Jay shovels out?
Well, this is the Washington Public Workers Union, and it's very sizable. I'll offer to you the membership is 50,000 plus. But again, Lars, I represent 154,000 people, 3 times that size as the union of my district, and I can't get any attention what in any manner from that governor.
Well, Senator, when I hear a number like that, I always like to do a little math. Now, this is creative math. But if I'm a Democrat politician like Inslee and I say 50,000 members in that union, should I do what they want me to do? Well, let's see. Most of those union members have a spouse. Some have children. Some have parents. Some have sons and daughters. If I don't, 50,000 union members might mean 200,000 or 300,000 votes. Oh, a lot of voters, a lot of money. I guess I'll do what they want them to do. Do you think my math is wrong on that?
I can't correct you on the math, Lars. I can say that $4,000 by the State Employees Union was given directly to the governor to get reelected, and again through the Democratic Party, that ramped up to $1.6 million in contributions. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't contribute to his reelection process. Maybe I regret not doing it now, because if I could have bought my way in to get that person's ear on behalf of my district, I would have written a check immediately.
Okay, can we do this instead? Let's go to the science side of things. Now, I like Israel a lot. Not as much as America, but I like Israel. It's a great country. Israel is one of the most vaccinated countries on the planet, and they're seeing a gigantic surge, a huge surge of COVID cases. Is the science really solid that if we only got everybody vaccinated or almost everybody vaccinated, that we wouldn't have this problem? Because Israel it ranks as one of the most vaccinated countries on the planet, and it's got a big problem with COVID right now.
Absolutely, Lars. The science of the vaccination is important to discuss, but it's a moving target. It changes, it seems, every day. Tomorrow's science is certainly not going to be today's, and I'll offer up to everybody, we've got to be able to come together and say, listen, we need everybody, both vaccinated and unvaccinated, to get through this. Quit segregating and creating contests and giving special attention to people, because the fairness has gone right out the window when it comes to Governor Inslee.
Do you think there's any chance of changing his mind?
Lars, that's that question. I wish we could capture that and take it onto that TV show Shark Tank. We do very well. If we could figure out what kind of science he's basing this on a day-to-day basis, I'll let you know how happy I'll be. But one person to rule over 550-plus days, 7.4 million people, well, I guess some people are more important than others, and that's been proven due to the current recent events.
Absolutely right. That's Washington State Senator Jeff Wilson. Oregon's problems are no different with the dictator and tyrant Kate Brown. Coming up in a moment, the purge at public universities continues. I'll get to that and your phone calls up next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It is the Radio Northwest Network, and we at least attempt to serve the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho with honestly provocative talk on a daily basis. And a big part of that is your participation. If you want to join that conversation, even as a naysayer, you're certainly welcome at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. But let me say a word first before I get to calls or anything else about a guy by the name of Peter Boghossian. Now, Peter Boghossian's been on this show before. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a brilliant writer. He has left Portland State University. He said, that's no big deal. Professors, I'm sure, come and go from universities all the time. He was denied tenure. And what tenure is supposed to be is if you go to a university and you show your worth, you're granted tenure, which makes you, if not bulletproof, you are much more secure there from being fired or having your contract not renewed. So that's part of the issue. He didn't get tenure. But he wrote a letter, and I'm not going to read the whole thing today. I hope to visit with Professor Boghossian about it tomorrow. But he wrote a letter in which he announced that he is leaving the university. And I thought it was very telling because if you read this letter, I don't know how a parent or grandparent could even think about sending their kids off to these kind of liberal indoctrination factories that public universities have become. But he wrote it to the provost, Susan Jeffords, and he said, I'm writing you today, this week, to resign as assistant professor of philosophy at Portland State University. Over the last decade, it's been my privilege to teach at the university. My specialties include critical thinking, ethics, and the Socratic method. And I teach classes like science and pseudoscience and the philosophy of education. But in addition to exploring classic philosophers and traditional texts, I've invited a wide range of guest lecturers to address my classes, from flat earthers to Christian apologists to global warming skeptics to Occupy Wall Street advocates. I'm proud of my work. So he's inviting a whole bunch of different people with a whole bunch of different ideas. He writes, I never once believed, and I've edited this a bit, not his content, but just the length, because I hope to talk to the professor tomorrow. I've never once believed, nor do I now, that the purpose of instruction was to lead my students to a particular conclusion. Rather, I sought to create the conditions for rigorous thought to help them gain the tools to hunt and furrow for their own conclusions. That's why I became a teacher. That's why I love teaching. But brick by brick, the university, this is Portland State University, has made this kind of intellectual exploration impossible. It has transformed a bastion of free inquiry into a social justice factory whose only inputs were race, gender, and victimhood, and whose only outputs were grievance and division. Now, I'm going to say parenthetically, I agree with the professor about that. He says students at Portland State University are not being taught to think. Rather, they're being taught to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. Faculty and administrators have abdicated the university's truth-seeking mission and instead drive intolerance of divergent beliefs and opinions. This has created a culture of offense where students are now afraid to speak openly and honestly. He said, I noticed signs of illiberalism, which has now fully swallowed the academy quite early during my time at Portland State. I witnessed students refusing to engage with different points of view. Have you seen that as a parent? I'm not even going to talk to you about that. You're going to trigger me, that kind of nonsense. He writes, questions from faculty at diversity trainings that challenged approved narratives were instantly dismissed. Those who asked for evidence to justify new institutional policies were accused of microaggressions, and professors were accused of bigotry for assigning canonical texts. These are the canons of education, written by philosophers who happen to have been European and male, meaning white and male. He writes, so in 2017, I co-published an intentionally garbled, peer-reviewed paper that took aim at this new orthodoxy. Its title was The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. And this was actually funny. Here's a professor who says, you guys publish a whole bunch of nonsense. I know. I'm going to create something that's entirely fake and see if you guys swallow it. He says this example of pseudo-scholarship, which was published in Cogent Social Sciences, argued that penises were products of the human mind and responsible for climate change. Immediately thereafter, I revealed the article as a hoax designed to shed light on the flaws in peer-reviewed and academic publishing. Shortly after this, swastikas in the bathroom with my name written under them began appearing in the 2 bathrooms near the philosophy department. They also occasionally showed up on my office door, in one instance accompanied by bags of feces. Our university remained silent. When it acted, it was against me, not the perpetrators. I continue to believe, perhaps naively, that if I exposed the flawed thinking on which PSU's new values were based, I could shake the university from its madness. In 2018, I co-published a series of absurdly or morally repugnant peer-reviewed articles in journals that focused on issues of race and gender. In one, we argued that there was an epidemic of dog rape at dog parks and proposed that we leash men the way we leash dogs. Our purpose was to show that this kind of scholarship was based not on finding truth, but advancing social grievances. This worldview is not scientific and is not rigorous. Administrators and faculty were so angered by the papers that they published an anonymous piece in the student paper, and PSU filed formal charges against me. Their accusation, research misconduct, based on the absurd premise that the journal editors who intentionally accepted our deranged articles were human subjects. I was found guilty of not receiving approval to experiment on humans. For me, the years that followed were marked by continued harassment. I'd find flyers around campus of me with a Pinocchio nose. I was spit on. I was threatened by passerby while I was walking to class. I was informed by students that my colleagues were telling them to avoid his classes. And of course, I was subject to more investigation. PSU has failed in fulfilling its duty. I'm doing this. In doing so, it has failed not only students, but the public that supports it. That's we taxpayers. While I am grateful for the opportunity to have taught at Portland State for over a decade, it's become clear to me this institution is no place for people who intend to think freely and explore ideas. This is not the outcome I wanted, but I feel morally obligated to make this choice. For 10 years, I have taught my students the importance of living by your principles. One of mine is to defend our system of liberal education from those who seek to destroy it. What would I be if I didn't? Sincerely, Peter Boghossian. Now, as I said, I hope to talk to the professor. He's been on the show before. I think those experiments that he did, who hasn't wanted to say, who's coming up with all this crazy research like shrimp on treadmills in the medical field, or crazy papers that say crazy things? I mean, even the articles you're seeing in papers right now that talk about how because we can all choose our genders, that men can menstruate and men can get pregnant and men need pap smears and gynecological exams. I mean, we say this is crazy stuff. Where do you think the crazy stuff is coming from? The decisions are being made by people who come out of these liberal universities where they are so crazy that if you write a paper about dog rape and suggest putting men on leashes, that somehow that is the greater offense, to have written it to show how flawed the system is, instead of just keeping quiet, going with the program, and agreeing whatever the politically correct and the distressed trigger class wants you to agree with. Back in just a moment, did Joe Biden and Barack Obama release the new government of Afghanistan from Gitmo? We're going to talk about that coming up next. I'll get to your phone calls and emails in a moment. It's the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. I'll get to your phone calls a bit later, and as you always, I hope you always remember, naysayers go to the head of the line on this show at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. The Biden administration and the way it has, I guess, interacted with the idea of a new government of Afghanistan, the Taliban, a terrorist organization, and even the crazy suggestion that they've made, why don't you have more women in your government? This, I don't know. I'm going to ask Cully Stimson about that, who's a senior legal fellow at Heritage and manager at the National Security Law Program. Cully, welcome to the program. Am I right to be a little confused by the fact that the State Department, the U.S. State Department, according to thehill.com, is saying to a Sharia law Muslim terrorist group, we think you ought to have more women in the government? This almost suggests they have absolutely no idea who they're dealing with. Or am I wrong about that?
Well, you shouldn't be a little confused. You should be completely confused. I mean, It is absurd, honestly, to think that this enemy who we've been fighting for over 20 years is going to change the way they are. I mean, they have no intention of that. I mean, imposing American ideals or even Western values on these people is absurd. It's not going to happen.
I couldn't even come up with a comparison short of perhaps, and this one's got hot buttons attached to it, but if somebody, in America said, hey, there's a little bit of Klan left, a couple of thousand idiots who believe in the Klan, but why doesn't the Klan have more BIPOC leadership within its group? And if you said that to someone, they'd say, what are you talking about? You're talking about a group that is antithetical to that very idea, and you're suggesting maybe it'd be better off if you had more BIPOC leadership in your group. You clearly don't have any idea what you're doing, and the idea that they're now trusting the Taliban's promises, oh, sure, we'll honor the exit of people who want to leave Afghanistan and get away to freedom somewhere else in the world. This suggests that, and Joe Biden, I'm sorry, let me throw one more thing at you, Cully, because I know complicated multi-part questions don't work. But yesterday, Joe Biden was asked by a reporter, are you going to recognize the Taliban as a government? And he said, oh, that's a long ways off. And I thought, he's suggesting that we might someday, as the United States of America, recognize this terrorist organization as the leader, as the official recognized government of a country?
Well, he's not the most articulate president we've had, and so we have to give him a pass on that. But the more important point is that before 9/11, Lars, 3 countries in the world recognized the Taliban as the legitimate ruling party of Afghanistan, which, by the way, the country of Afghanistan ratified and made part of their domestic law, the Geneva Conventions, believe it or not. Of course, these are not paragons of modernity. This is, North Korea, Syria, and one other country, I think. So we did not recognize the Taliban as the legitimate ruling party. We should never recognize the Taliban as the legitimate ruling party of Afghanistan. And my worry, as I'm sure you have too, is that the reason they're holding out this verbal olive branch is to hope that may in some way allow them to turn a blind eye as we do what we should have done in the beginning, and that is get the rest of the Americans and a lot of the SIVs out of the country.
Yeah, and I understand, Cully, most of the friends I've had who've served in the military say hope is not a strategy. And I don't think hope is a strategy, especially in this case. I mean, we seem to have given up. We've given up Bagram Air Base, and now the Chinese are talking about occupying it with their aircraft. So we used to have a base that was right near China. Now China apparently has a base that we paid around $10 billion to build, courtesy of the Biden administration.
I'd be curious to hear what then Vice President Joe Biden's opinion was on the transfer of the 5 Taliban folks from Guantanamo in exchange for Bo Bergdahl.
The deserter.
Because those Gitmo graduates, by the way, our Gitmo graduates go on to big things. 5 of them, the ones that the Obama administration with Vice President Biden in the vice president's chair, now have the unenviable acclimates of having Nori, a guy who was at Gitmo, who's the acting minister of Borders and Tribal Affairs, a guy named Wasik, whose files I know as well, is the director of intelligence. Carr is the acting minister of information, and a guy named Mazloum, who's the deputy minister of defense. And they wear their Gitmo graduate degrees as a badge of honor. And you can thank the Obama administration for installing them into office.
Cully, I'm talking to Cully Stimson from the National Security Law Program and also at Heritage. At the time these guys were traded, this was largely, until they announced this is the trade we've made, and a lot of us had the reaction of, we don't negotiate with terrorists, you've just done that. We certainly don't negotiate to get back a deserter like Bo Bergdahl, and you don't let bad guys go from Gitmo, and we said this is going to be trouble down the line. And the Obama administration said, oh, no. They promise, cross their hearts and hope to die. They're just going to go off and retire somewhere or not be trouble. And now they're exactly that.
Right. And yes, in wars, we do talk with the enemy. Yes, in wars that end, which apparently we are or are not ending this war. I can't tell from this administration. There is a repatriation of POWs. This is the only war we've fought, Lars, that I've said on your show before, where we released the enemy during the war, including the 779 from Gitmo. There's only 30 or so left there. And so remember, the Taliban asked for these specific 5 high-value guys a year before the Bo Bergdahl swap. And then Secretary of Defense Gates said, no way. And all the military people said, no way. And it was a year later when the politicos overruled the professionals and say, we're going to do it anyway. And so I understand the need to get a person in the military, U.S. military, back into U.S. custody. I get that. But this was a very high cost for that trade.
It absolutely was. Let me ask you about one other issue. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken came out today and said, yes, it's true. We have people on the ground in airplanes ready to leave, and the Taliban is saying, well, you don't have your paperwork in order. Is that really what's going on, or is this the Taliban, again, negotiating with the now Biden administration for what they can get for the release of these people? Which should we believe?
I don't know. That's the problem with this administration. It's very difficult to tell when they're telling the truth or when they're spinning the truth they want you to believe. I mean, you have people who are in civil society, ex-military, ex-CIA, and others who are working really hard now to help not only the Americans get out of the country, but also people who helped us in our 20-year war. And yet it should have been the administration starting this spring, getting the Americans out of the country, getting the SIVs processed appropriately vetted and brought to the United States or other countries, but they botched this. This is the worst botching of a foreign policy issue that I've seen in my lifetime, and it's going to hurt them in a number of ways.
Cully, that's the part I understand. They say, well, Trump didn't get anything done. Well, Trump was gone on January 20th. You've had 8 months to get this done. And like you said, an awful lot of his paperwork. It's vetting and paperwork and saying who goes on the leave list, who gets paperwork. The fact that they didn't, apparently the Biden administration didn't get anything done, and they have a 30,000 member State Department that could have been in charge of this. Were they just asleep at the switch?
It didn't seem to me that they had much problems reversing the executive orders or edicts of the Trump administration within milliseconds of coming into office.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's Cully Stimson from the Heritage Foundation. We'll be back in a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. That's right, it is, and it's the Radio Northwest Network serving Oregon, Washington, and Idaho with honestly provocative talk on a daily basis, and you're welcome to join the conversation at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. Our Twitter poll, and I want to give you a little explanation on my no vote on this. The question was provoked by Joe Biden announcing that he wants the United States to be 40% solar within 15 years. Now, I know there are people who hear that and they'll say, well, yeah, I kind of like solar. Those panels are kind of cool. They make electricity, and once you've manufactured them, it's free until they wear out in 25 years, and then you buy some more from the Chinese Communist government of China. Okay, great idea. So it makes us more dependent on China. It makes our electric grid less secure. And as I like to point out, with both wind and solar, they have something in common. The wind blows, on average, about 1/3 of every day. Now, there's some days it doesn't blow at all, and there are other days it blows all day long, but the average is 1/3 of every day. So if you generate power from a source that is only working 1/3 of the day, you're going to have to build 3 times as much power to get the equivalent number of kilowatts or megawatts. Same thing is true of wind. Wind blows about 1/3 of the day. Sun shines about 1/3 of the day. And if you say, well, it's summertime, or it's the tail end of summer right now, the sun shines more. Yes, and it shines a whole lot less in December and January and February. So that's the first problem. The second problem is almost all of the solar panels are now being built in China and Malaysia, which means we're going to be sending trillions of dollars to those countries. It is not going to make jobs except as installers of solar panels back in this country. And further, to increase the amount of solar and wind, solar in particular, you would have to increase it tenfold in the next 12 years to meet Joe Biden's demand of 40% solar within 15 years, or 15 years that he wants. Now, this is crazy. The first tiny little percentage of solar that we've achieved has taken decades and hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies. Now, if you assume that the federal government is sitting fat and happy, it's not. It's buried in debt right now. It's overspending its own means by trillions of dollars. But no, we have extra trillions of dollars to pump into building a lot of solar while we close down the power sources that we have in abundance. Among them, even if you want to ignore coal, although I think it's possible to have clean burning coal, we're ignoring nuclear. We come up with the best nuclear power plant designs in the world, and then they get built everywhere except America. And then you've got natural gas, which we have in abundance. The greenies hate natural gas. They don't like natural gas. They don't like nuclear. They don't like coal. And you say, what's left? Well, let's dam some more rivers. Well, no, they're actually talking about tearing dams out of rivers, not installing new ones. So that isn't likely a solution. So Joe Biden saying we're going to be 40% solar within 12 years ignores physics. It ignores reality. It ignores the financial costs. It ignores all of that. He just says, we're going to make it happen because I said so. Well, good for you, Joe. Most people don't think you know your way from the White House to the helicopter, let alone know anything about solar or wind or business because you've never had a real job in the real world in your life. Today's Twitter poll brought to you by our friends at Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at ultimatetruckservice.com. Let's go to Jane. Hey, Jane, thanks for listening on the Radio Northwest Network. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Lars. It's nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
I was wanting to talk with you about this book that I've been reading called The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters.
Yes.
So it goes really well with what you were just talking about. And, you know, I'm just learning so much from reading this book, and I wanted to make sure that your listeners, I mean, I don't know how it is here in Portland, and I can't even reach out to the school because I don't want to be blacklisted. But apparently some schools, many schools have permission to allow kids off campus to go get testosterone treatments. And
it wouldn't surprise me at all. And they do it without the parents' knowledge, which I think is just inherently wrong to make serious, lifelong, in some cases, lifelong decisions for kids before they're old enough to do it. And to do it without their parents' knowledge is just dead wrong.
Right. So, you know, I have an adolescent daughter, and, you know, this statistically, I keep telling her statistically it's impossible for so many people to be transgender. But like this like recently, the third friend of hers like came out as a boy, and it's just driving me insane.
Can I suggest something to you? I mean, I don't have any biological kids. I have 2 adult children now that you know, Tina and I raised. And do kids often want to get your attention?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
From the time they're old enough they want your attention. Do they sometimes do crazy things to get your attention or to get other people's attention?
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think an awful lot of this is about that, because if you announce you're transgender, it makes you the subject of special attention. And remember that when kids get attention, they don't always get it for the good things. They might say, hey, Mom and Dad, look what I can do. I can stand on my hands, or I can do this, or I can do that. Oftentimes they do other things like pitch a fit in a grocery store to get your attention. You say, but that's bad attention. Doesn't matter. Attention is attention, and I think that is what an awful lot of this is all about. This segment of the show brought to you by Marquee Hot Tubs. Thank you, Jane. They'll give you the ultimate hot tub and swim spa experience. Visit them online or at one of their 3 locations, marqueehottubs.com.